other speakers like him should be commended for going out and reliving the nightmares they've lived through. And you people here today should also be commended for showing an interest in the historical context. With respect to my own personal history, my parents were survivors. My mother grew up in a small town, a suburb of Krakow, Poland, and much of her family lived in Poland. And when the war started, she was actually in Krakow. And when they liquidated the Jews of Krakow into initially the ghetto and into the concentration camp they built outside of Krakow, Plaszow, she went along with that process. Plaszow was the camp featured in Schindler's List. And she saw Amon Getz, who was the chief commandant of Plaszow concentration camp. It was actually a labor camp, albeit a staging area for sending Jews to other camps, those Jews who couldn't work. And she had a couple of escapes from death when she was criticized by Amon Getz for walking too slowly. He said to her, "Jewish girl, why are you walking so slowly?" She was terrified. She just started to run. But for the grace of God, he could have pulled out the pistol that he carried on his side and shot her, like he did many other people. She was probably Joe's age, and she was a worker, and she had strength, and she was sent to a labor camp. She passed through Auschwitz. Her clothes were taken from her. She was given prison clothes, and as part of that process, she and the other women with her went through this shower. And of course, the shower, this Auschwitz, as Joe talked about, had special significance. But these women, when they went to the shower, they were actually showers. They were intended to clean lice off their bodies, having traveled to Auschwitz in these cattle cars. And she survived Auschwitz, and with friends that she made during that time, proceeded to a number of labor camps, where until about the end of the war, in a place not too far from where Joe was at Gunzerkirchen, north of there, in actually southern Germany near Flossenburg, but distances in Europe were relatively, not so great as they are in the United States for some of the major cities. She got caught up in the same death march that Gerda Klein was involved in. Gerda Klein wrote the book All of My Life about her own personal experiences in World War II. And she's a Buffalo person. And she speaks at a lot of different area schools, and I expect she's been here in Jamestown as well. But there were a number of women in that same death march, and other survivors that speak out of the Holocaust Research Center also were on the death march. And they were liberated also by Patton's Third Army in a small town in Czechoslovakia called Prokatice. And my mother passed away last year, and she suffered in her final years from Alzheimer's. And one of the last things to go were her love of music. And her favorite song was God Bless America. And matter of fact, when I finished the eulogy at her funeral, I asked everyone to stand up and sing my mother's favorite song, God Bless America, and they did. And of course, one of the reasons when she said God Bless America, what she meant was, of course, her liberation from the death camp and really her appreciation of the great citizens of the United States who took in the Jewish people and other refugees. And of course, when you think about God blessing America, it's more than just the coal, the oil, the amber waves of grain. It's actually men like your own Robert Jackson that we've been blessed with at critical times of our history, from the founding fathers, to Lincoln, to the Roosevelt. We've been fortunate that at times of crisis, great men and women have stepped forward. And of course, it's not just great men, but it's ordinary citizens who become aware of terrible things happening in the world and don't just sit in their homes watching a football game on a Saturday afternoon, but make the effort to get involved. So we're very honored to be here, very impressed by the turnout, and when we sing God Bless America, we're talking about people like us, like you and us. That's my story.
There isn't much that I can add to that. I'd just like to say, in the entire Buffalo area, there's, at the university level, there's only one course in the Holocaust taught. I teach that course at Buff State. And it's quite difficult for me to teach that course. I can't teach it every year. I can't teach it every 2 years. I kind of roll around to it every third year. As a matter of fact, I would have avoided it altogether, not intentionally. I just kind of would forget it. I'd never roll around to it until last year. A student said, I graduate a year from now, and I've been waiting for 3 years for you to teach that course. When are you going to do it? And I thought, oh, it's already time. I've been putting it off. I've been putting it off for a good reason. I just didn't want to see it. But all right, it's time to go. And so I taught the course, and after the course was over, or at the end of it, I recruited Joe to come and join a panel and speak to our kids. If it's difficult for me to teach that course, I can appreciate what it means for Joe to relive this kind of thing for the benefit of the history and for the benefit of all of us gathered here and people like us, time after time. There isn't enough I can say to thank you for your putting yourself through in order to do this. It is certainly very, very much appreciated.
Rabbi,
Yes, sir.
as you teach the course, do you inject the efforts of Raoul Wallenberg?
Wallenberg comes up. There is, as a matter of fact, a Wallenberg Society locally. Is Dixie around here someplace?
Dixie's up there.
Well, yes, wave your hand there. Okay, you need to talk to this lady. This lady is part of the Wallenberg Society here. Do you know who Wallenberg is? Everybody know who Wallenberg is? Well, he was a Swedish diplomat, a member of a very prominent family, I think a banking family, who discovered, he was assigned to, where was he?
In Budapest.
In Budapest, and he used his credentials as a Swedish diplomat and as a part of the diplomatic corps to squirrel many people out of the path of the Nazis, and a great many people owe their lives to Wallenberg. His family was not crazy about what he was doing because he was risking, believe it or not, their good name by opposing the official Nazi government. And
He's one of the righteous. The righteous buried in the Holy Land.
yeah. There is a considerable group of righteous people, so-called righteous Gentiles, who are honored in Israel. There is the Avenue of the Righteous, where trees are planted in their honor and their memory, and many of them are buried there. He is one of those. At the end of the war, he fell into the hands of our friends, the Soviets. And he disappeared there. Nobody ever heard about him again. From time to time, one heard that he was, in fact, in custody in some kind of a Soviet detention or some Soviet prison. On what grounds, nobody knows. But the Wallenberg Society is alive and well, and Dixie will be happy to meet with you afterwards and talk to you about it. Yeah, we try to include Wallenberg. There is so much to include, for heaven's sake. There's libraries, many libraries of material on even aspects of the Holocaust, literature of the Holocaust, art of the Holocaust, music that was produced by people who were facing their own death, and yet they had the courage and the artistic drive to produce music and plays and literature and poetry. All this stuff is available, and you try to go through it. You try to do it. One of the best things that that we can use is, in fact, Spielberg's film, Schindler's List, which is reasonably accurate, it's quite accurate, in fact, in its presentation. And I always have our students see it, and I am perpetually amazed that these kids who have had virtually no contact with this kind of history, and maybe this comes to you as a surprise, but many of our young people have had no contact with history at all, of any kind, but they suck it up, they become involved very, very much. Has that not been your experience?
Yes, we speak to many schools all the way to Bradford, PA, and it's amazing the letters we get from the students that since we've been to their school, they feel like this is a great country, and and they're glad they're the future because they're going to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. So it's amazing the letters that we get. And these are students that never heard about the Holocaust.
Yes. Yes, sir.
I spent some time working in Germany with people my own age who grew up after the war, German artists, who were very curious about Judaism and the thing that they lost in their culture. I'm just wondering what kind of, if you know, what kind of Holocaust education goes on with German kids?
I've run into a lot of exchange students here, German kids, and they were just as interested as the American kids about the Holocaust because they didn't know about it either, some of them. And a lot of them felt very humble about it, and they want to see changes. And this is always going to be a curse on the German people, what happened.
Well, by now I got interested in working in Germany many years ago, about 30 years ago. By now I've made about 26, 27 lecture tours in Germany. All of them, of course, at their expense. God forbid I should pay for it. But most of the major universities and many other institutions I've drifted in and out of there for some kind of lecture tour at one time or another. And I was over there some time ago. I was the founding principal, founding rector of the Abraham Geiger College, which is part of the University of Potsdam and is the first Jewish seminary on the continent since World War II, since Hitler. And they are quite well informed and they're interested in pursuing this. Name Goldhagen mean anything here? You recognize the name Goldhagen?
Hitler's willing executioners.
Yeah, right.
Say again?
Hitler's willing executioners.
Yes, Hitler's willing executioners. Goldhagen was a professor, did a dissertation at Harvard on Hitler's willing executioners, by which he means the common ordinary man. I mean, you have a small crowd of people at the top. Where did all the help come from that did this? Who was involved here? And he found that it wasn't hard to find people who were willing to do this kind of thing. To the contrary, you had people who volunteered to go out and shoot people, to go out and hunt Jews. Reasonable, regular people. A number of them were police officers. By day they're giving traffic tickets, and by night they're shooting people. And he found that that wasn't a rarity. Hope Goldhagen went over there to give a lecture after he had published his book, which incidentally reads like a doctoral dissertation, repetitive and badly written and god-awful to read, but the material is all there. Were packed with people who wanted to hear what he had to say, but the people were all in their 20s and 30s. Okay? You people in your 40s weren't around, and your people in your 70s didn't want him to come to town at all. But the interest was definitely there. Helen Hirsch was alive still. She survived the war. So he said, Helen Hirsch will testify for me. So they brought Helen Hirsch, and they said, is it true what this man says, that he really never hurt anybody, that he was trying to run a decent camp? She looked at him and she said, the man's a monster. He went around murdering people all the time.
what could he have been thinking to ask Helen Hirsch to come and testify for him? What could he have been thinking that at the very end, he's still wondering, he's still asserting his loyalty to Hitler? He believed. He was a believer. He was a true believer. Watch out for true believers.
I think the reason Hitler, I mean, Germany needed a scapegoat, you know, and that's what happened. You get a scapegoat, and the economy is down, and you pick a certain minority group, and it's amazing what can happen. It can happen anywhere, okay? Right.
I might have a little perspective on your question regarding the Nuremberg trials, because certainly my parents saw the history of the Nuremberg trials, the Spencer Tracy judgment at Nuremberg. But the reaction to the Nuremberg trials needed to take place for the benefit of civilization as a whole, almost on a governmental level, that the United States and the Allies had to come up with a mechanism for the benefit of all humanity to say this kind of behavior can't be tolerated by human beings. But my mother never encountered Hermann Goering, and Joe never ran into Joseph Goebbels. And it was their neighbors that affected them. When Joe walked down that street in this village of 700 people, and his neighbors made fun of him, said, "Can I have your winter coat?" Or when the average soldier who was, otherwise would have worked on an assembly line or as a postman or whatever, pointed a bayonet, that is something that most of the survivors remember, and that's the visceral. And many of those people just, after the war, went on with their lives. So it's important that trials like Nuremberg take place to establish a level of morality that's expected at any type of encounter when nations go to war. But as for the impact on the individual, concentration camp survivor, they're more on the eye level with their prison guards or whatnot. And similarly, the guys, in the death camps of Bataan and in Japan, they never met Tojo or anybody like that. They deal with it on the level of the guy who had the knife to their neck. So it's a much different perspective and appreciation of setting things right.
Gentlemen, excuse me, we have a number of students here from the school whose parents are outside waiting for them and their rides and things, and I'm sorry, I didn't want you to think it's rude or anything. It's been a wonderful presentation, I appreciate it.
One comment for those who have to leave. The synagogue normally provides some kind of comestibles for a meeting of this kind. So all kinds of goodies have been prepared for you out there. Please help yourself. I don't want to take any of it home. I'm a member of Weight Watchers. I have to account for all of this. So please do whatever you have to do out there. There was a question, however, please.
Yes, my question is for Mr. Diamond.
Sure, go ahead.
It was so sad to hear you tell about the Jewish, I guess they were guards that helped to kill their own people. Was that done as voluntary, or were they forced to do that? Was that?
You mean when they just killed people at
at
random? No, they.
How did that happen? Would you explain that a little bit?
Well, we had Gestapos that were guarding us. It's a special unit. It's not the Wehrmacht. Wehrmacht is a fighting force. And it was in style to kill. I mean, they were getting bored, and they were just going to shoot prisoners. Nobody's going to put them in jail or anything like that. And that's what's confusing.
Joe, she's asking
No,
about
I
the
mean
capos.
the Jewish people.
Oh, what?
Were the capos who helped?
Oh, the prisoners.
Yes.
Yeah, some of these capos were worse than the soldiers.
I mean, was that a lie so that they wouldn't have the same fate, or did they volunteer? I can't understand why they would want to
Well,
assist in someone.
to become a capo, you had to have a record that you were a killer one time. And they were in charge of Auschwitz. We had in Birkenau, we call it, where I was, it's Auschwitz too. We had a couple that was plain murderer. He was walking the streets in prison, and if he didn't like the look of a prisoner, he just beat him up until he died. These guys are animals.
You understand that by becoming a capo, you live 6 weeks longer.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is, you'll grasp at anything for another 6 weeks of life.
Yeah.
Up to 6 weeks, you'll be in the next
Yeah,
shipment.
they
They're
have a
gonna
bet-
put you in there too. But you'll have at least maybe a couple of weeks longer to
They have a
live.
better living. They're able to go home to their families at night, and they made it easier for them.
Okay, thank you,
Yeah.
that explains
Not
that.
the Jews were able.
The Jews weren't there.
The Jews weren't able to go home to
Oh, the Jews were never couples. They were always like Stubenmelster, like,
Well, she was asking about that, the
She's
people who
talking
clean
about
up the ovens.
Jews.
oh, Jews, I'm sorry, I've talked too much today, but what?
Those Jews who were recruited to help with the Nazi process were
Oh, you mean
people
in the gas
in the
chamber?
gas chambers, yeah.
Okay.
They were doing it in
No.
order to live a couple of weeks longer.
They didn't volunteer for that.
I see.
They picked strong people that are strong physical, and they told them what to do, and they became like a machine.
Oh, I see.
And every 3 months they were killed. They had a new group, so they couldn't tell. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Okay, so
Well, I
that's,
didn't clarify myself.
I mean, right in the gas chamber itself, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever personally or closely encountered somebody who did not believe that the Holocaust occurred or of its
Yeah, well, first of all, it's an insult anybody tells me. I always tell them, if you have any doubts whether it happened, if you have a telephone book here, maybe in Jamestown, call up the German consulate and ask him if there was a Holocaust. That's all I gotta tell them.
But have you met such people? Have you?
Yes, I have met, but the question they ask me, what do you tell people that say it never happened? Well, you know, General Eisenhower liberated extermination camps, General Patton. You know, I mean, what do we have to do? Where are these people? Where's my family?
But what arguments do they use against you?
They don't make sense. It's almost like they belong to a Nazi group, you know, they just don't make sense. The arguments are that the people were killed, that there was no gas chamber. I mean, there's no answer to it. It doesn't make sense what they do. I don't usually talk to them too much.
I wonder why.
I mean, you know, how can you make a statement like that?
How come the judge doesn't call you?
What?
The president of
President
Iran.
of Iran, how come the judge? He doesn't
Yeah,
call you?
yes.
Well,
Ahmadinejad, yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, he don't have much power. He'd like to be like Hitler, but he's not that strong as you think he is. He talks a good game when he's here.
I haven't met too many people in that group, but I have read the publications that some of them put out. Their arguments are that there are no eyewitnesses, which is nonsense. There's one sitting right here. There are no eyewitnesses. There is no evidence, no credible evidence. There is no, if there were gas chambers, what happened to them? Where are they? Oh, I've seen them, all right, but, you know,
Let them
the
come.
argument is, so where are they? I'll tell you where they are.
Well, let him come. We'll take him for a ride to Auschwitz. We'll take him right to the chambers. Maybe we'll leave him there. I don't know.
Why are there no films? Why are there no witnesses? Why are there no people who have seen this sort of thing? Well, of course, there are answers to all of these things, but you asked, what are the arguments? Those are
Well,
the
there's
arguments.
Armenian people were killed by the Turks, you know, in the 20s, and nobody talks about it, and nobody believes it. There was another Holocaust there. Nobody heard much about it.
You came here as a young child, or quite young.
Yeah,
How did you learn the language?
I was
Or
about
did you
16,
know?
pardon me?
You were quite young when you came here.
Yeah, I was about 16 when I came here. And
But did you know English then? How did you
I lived in England for a couple of years, so I spoke King's English. No, I'm just... No, I learned a little bit in England, so when I came here, I almost sounded like I'm Canadian, but once I got mixed up with the rest of the refugees, I sounded just like them.
Yes, sir.
During the war, the majority of the Germans, of course, before the war. Were there any Germans at all not for the war, true or false?
After the war, all the Germans were against the war. There were no Nazis. You could go through Germany from one end to the other. There were no Nazis at all. In fact, if we had only known there was only Hitler and Goering and no one else in the whole country wanted anything to do with the Nazi Party. They'll tell you that.
But during the war, how about during the war?
During the war?
Yes.
Yeah.
They were very few because the Gestapo, the German government, ran by fear, and they were vicious and ruthless. There was a very famous group of college students who opposed the war, much like the kids of my generation opposed the Vietnam War. They were called the White Rose, and that name should be remembered through history because the students who stood up against Hitler virtually all ended up on meat hooks hung on piano wire. That was Hitler's response to dissent. So you had to have very high expectation, a lot of courage to oppose the Nazi regime, during the war. And the famous German colonel who attempted to assassinate Hitler. Stauffenberg. These are names that should be blessed in history because they were acts of remarkable courage, not necessarily to save the Jews, but to save their fellow Germans from what they envisioned as a terrible fate. But nonetheless, they were very brave who tried to stand up against Hitler and his regime.
One man who should surely be blessed with Mr. Schindler.
Oscar Schindler, of course.
You know, the economy was down in Germany. Here comes a guy like Hitler and Goering, and they wanted to sound like Jack Kennedy, like we're going to build this country, Germany is strong, and they had support. And even though he was a maniac, they were willing to go along with that too. But again, that's why you didn't have Germany wanted that war, because they were beaten in World War I, and here was a chance to bring Germany where it belongs. This is what's been going through most of the German people's mind at the time, before the war. I spoke with a lot of German people while I was in the army. I was in civilian clothes, and I listened to their opinions.
I, of course, didn't mean to forget about Mr. Schindler, and I have a special reason for that. My family came from Krakow, and my mother was in the same camp that Schindler pulled Jews from, but she was not on Schindler's List. She was a strong young woman, and they sent her to a labor camp. But there were other members of my family who were on Schindler's List, including my grandfather, Arya. If you go onto the website, the Oscar Schindler website, you'll see the names of the Jews he saved, and in that list of names is a man by the name of Arya Ferber, who was my grandfather. My grandfather passed away in 1955 at the age of 85. So at the end of the war in 1945, he was 75. He was one of the oldest people on Schindler's List. And I have a wonderful cousin named Renya Ferber, and she was one of the youngest people on Schindler's List. And she lives in Boston today and does a lot of lecturing on her experiences during the Holocaust. Experience of visiting the American Military Cemetery in Normandy. And as we sit here today, we can never forget how much we owe those GIs who gave their lives to defeat Hitler. And many of them killed during the Normandy invasion are buried at the Colville Cemetery, American Military Cemetery. And mostly by far, the majority of the graves there have beautiful white crosses on them. But there also are several graves there with the Star of David. And one particular grave is the grave of a fellow who grew up in my hometown, Binghamton. And I had the honor of putting a stone on his grave when we visited that cemetery. It was quite a moving experience for me.
Yes, sir.
Did you encounter any partisans in your journeys from Auschwitz to liberation?
Yeah, there was a lot of Yugoslavian, Tito's group, Tito, Yugoslavia, at the time it was Yugoslavia. There were a lot of partisans that we used to find that when we went to work detail sometimes, they used to come in through the woods, and so they were involved, you know. But most of them didn't have a chance because when they were in Germany, they just didn't know where to go, you know. They couldn't run away, and a lot of them were killed. But I didn't have real contact with them because I was mostly, you know, I didn't escape from the camp, you know.
Yes, ma'am.
If a Jewish soldier, part of the Allies, was caught, would they go to a prisoner of war camp, or would they go to one of the other concentration camps, the extermination camps?
That's a good question. If they didn't know, well, they got dog tags, and dog tags, it tells you what you are. So
It can. You can have it without.
Yeah. Some of them got away. Go ahead. You want to answer that?
If he had an H, which is what they used for Hebrew, if he had an H on his dog tags, the best thing he could do is get rid of the dog tag if he was being captured. If they knew he was Jewish, they could just as well send him to a concentration camp. However, if about a certain way into the war, Jewish soldiers no longer carried an identification of religion on their dog tag. The only reason it's there is that so if somebody dies in the field, they know whether to report the death to a priest or to a rabbi, and who's going to take charge of this. It's a financial question. But when they realized that this could be a death sentence for somebody, they stopped using the H on the dog tag, and they were instructed to just pass themselves off as an average soldier, in which case they would have gone to a prisoner of war camp, which is also no bargain, but at least it wasn't a death camp.
It's like holding it.
There's a question over here.
Yes.
Shelley?
My question is, are you concerned with the fact that the Holocaust survivors are passing on, and it's not going to be, 20 years or so, there won't be any discussions like this going on?
Well, that's why.
Joe's gonna live to 120.
Yeah, that's why it's important, because there's very few of us left. And, you know, I'm probably one of the youngest, and I remember the Alamo. Yeah, no, I just want to say,
Yes.
very few of us left. We want to make sure that,
Yes.
I just wanted to go back a couple questions to the reality of the war, because growing up, as my mother and father, my grandmother and grandfather, my great-grandmother were all survivors. You know, growing up and listening to everybody at the table, it was almost like watching TV. It wasn't like a reality until I got into my teens, is where it all really, really, really impacted me. And here I'm at 51 right now, and I'm sitting here crying, and you do that. And I want to thank you for bringing that reality to these children like this, my daughter and my nephew. And I want them to know, because how much it made me appreciate that flag and the freedom and everything else from what the stories that I've heard, that I just want to appreciate my thanks for you to be able to stand up there and do that, because it's hard for me to be here to listen. And thank you.
thank you very much.
Yes, over there.
When you were in the concentration camp, did at any time you think about revolting against the regime, or did you care while you were working about the revolting, or was it never a thought?
Revolting in the camp? You're talking about revolting in the camp?
In the camp against
You mean fighting for?
Yeah, revolution in the camps.
Yeah, well, there was a Warsaw Ghetto uprising, you know, where the prisoner had a chance, and then there was an uprising right in Auschwitz, where they killed 150 German soldiers, and they took over the whole gas chamber operation, because then the Germans brought in some more troops. So wherever possible, there was.
There were many camps.
You got to remember one thing, you know, when we were in the concentration camp, we were not prisoners, we were not a trained army. You know, you had kids, 12, 13 years old, they didn't know how to handle a gun, and, you know, it was tough to fight back, you know.
There's another question here.
Yeah.
When you were in Auschwitz, have you heard stories about people trying to escape? Like digging under the fences to escape?
I was in Auschwitz too, Birkenau, and I tell you, some people escaped, the only time they escaped when they were in a work detail outside of the camp. But they always caught them and they brought them back and they hung them on Sunday. The whole concentration camp had to watch people were hanging. So to answer your question, it's very tough to escape and go on because it was about 17 acres, the area where we were. We had guards every 15 feet. We had guard posts. We were surrounded by barbed wire, which was electrified. You got electrocuted if you touched that. So it was a tough situation.
Let me add one note to that. You got to understand the investment that the German government made in this death camp business. They toward the end of the war, they were short on rolling stock, by which I mean boxcars, railroad equipment, cars for transporting troops, transporting ammunition, things like that. The Army had second call, second priority on rolling stock. First priority was the death camp. In other words, it was more important for them at the end of the war. It was more important for them to serve the death camps than to serve the military. Figure that one out. The first call on the money and on the power and on the rolling stock and on all that was the death camps. So they were very well equipped. They had plenty of soldiers. They had the front might not have had enough soldiers, but the death camps had plenty of soldiers. So it was very difficult to resist.
Back here.
Yes.
I just had one last question. Was there, Mr. Diamond, was there anybody at all in your hometown, your area, that really stood up for you, or the other people who?
We read a lot about the righteous Gentiles, which there were a lot in Poland, and especially in Denmark. But I want to tell you one thing, not in my hometown. I don't know why. There wasn't one person, even our next door neighbors who were watching us. They said they were afraid. I don't think they were afraid. The only thing I want to mention now is how come the German people didn't revolt? They saw the war is ending. They saw Hitler was a psychopath. They saw it's the end. But they were going to the last minute, even the Battle of Berlin against the Russians. Why couldn't they just give up and revolt? And Italy was a German ally. They saw the light. They saw it. They gave up. They started changing. But Germany had to go to the last second, even they were losing. They still had to fight. And the proof is when they were fighting Berlin against the Russians. That's what bothers me. That's what bothers me about the German people. Yeah.
Yes.
How did you keep your will to survive? Surrounded on all the evil, in those camps.
Yeah.
Without knowing, what's going on the outside.
Yeah. Well, you were looking forward. You were always hoping to see your parents again. You want to see the face of the enemy when they lose the war. That's what kept me going too, And every day, in order to survive, you had to maneuver. You had to steal from your fellow man just to survive. You become an animal. But I never wanted to kill myself. I didn't want to give them that satisfaction.
I want to thank everybody for coming, and I want to suggest to you, if you want to just read a thin little book that it's not any bigger than this, and it's written by a Nobel laureate, Night, by Elie Wiesel. He was there. He's a poet. It's not a poetic book, but it's very cleanly and well written. And I use it for my students. It's an insight. You've seen the book.
Yeah, right.
It'll give you a kind of a view that you're not going to get otherwise. And with that comment, I want to thank both you guys.